Yes, good evening. We'll call this meeting to order. And the first thing I'd like to do is thank everybody for their attendance today. It means a lot to the city of Beaumont. We have some new members. We have 4 new members. I'd like you to introduce yourself. We'll start over here with John. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And the last question, John, is right there, is why did you accept being on this committee?
All right, well, so like I was telling, most people here know me. Obviously, I have a couple of restaurants in town, J. Wilson's and JW's Patio. I'm from this area. I've grown up in this area. I left for a while and came back and kind of started establishing my family and businesses, and it's been very, very, very big blessing. Kind of to answer your question is I'm ingrained here. I got businesses here. I'm not moving here. I think this is a very important topic for everybody, you know, and I was honored to be able to ask to be on it. And, you know, I had the ability to, I mean, I'm in the public light a lot. I get to talk to a lot of people. I get to hear a lot of feedback from people. And so I think I can kind of bring a little bit of that voice to maybe this committee, if it means anything, you know, from talking to people.
Thank you. Mike?
My name is Mike DeLuna. Thank you for having me here. I think that, for one, I also am an entrepreneur here in Southeast Texas. I run a local real estate company, and I am honored to be a part of this committee because I'm a firm believer if you're not part of the solution, then you're probably part of the problem. So instead of complaining about everything, I feel like make your voice heard, be part of anything that is positive in our area, and this is definitely probably at the top of my list. So I'm honored to be here. Thanks to meet everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Alexia?
Hello, everyone. Alexia Morgan. I have a commercial maintenance service since 2008, so I'm another entrepreneur. I was elected to this committee by Chris Lurio from Ward 4, and I just wanted to know a little bit about, more about the logistics in the city, how things are run, and get a better understanding, so when people ask you, you know what to say, and go from there. So I'm happy to serve.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Alexia. Pam?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Pamela Wise. I'm retired, lifelong resident of the city of Beaumont. Hello, David. Okay. And I've done several things here in Beaumont, but most importantly, I've raised my family here. Both of my boys graduated from Westbrook High School and attended Lamar University, and I am just very proud to be a part of what I think is a good idea and a good deal from Beaumont. So, and the reason I joined, to be honest with you, is because Mr. Kenneth is here tonight. Make sure you tell him you saw me. Actually called me and asked me to participate, and very interested in workforce development, education. I taught English and Beaumont ISD, and like I said, I attended Lamar University, and I just think we have some very good aspects of Beaumont that we need to make sure the positive things are actually talked about and shared throughout Southeast Texas, and the United States.
All right, thank you so much. Jeff?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay?
Gotcha.
Great. Well, my name is Jeff Barton, and I'm your project manager, but let's start with a few other introductions, particularly for those of you who are new, and to remind other folks. The leader from the city side is the Assistant City Manager, June Ellis. And June, maybe you want to introduce some of the other folks that are here, or just get them to stand up from the city?
Yes, June Ellis, Assistant City Manager, one of 2. Chris Boone here to my right is an Assistant City Manager as well. This is a very important project to us there at City Hall and the Executive Office. It's something that we've been planning actually for the last 2 years as we have prepared our 5-year capital improvement plan and other plans for the city. So we're excited about everyone here today and everybody's participation in what we feel is going to really redefine Beaumont for the next couple of generations. That's the goal here. And for each one of these meetings, we will have staff on board, key staff, that will help you guys, the members of this committee, make decisions to help narrow down those projects that we as a city feel are really important to consider to go on a bond election. So sitting behind you there, we have various city staff members on the first and second row Parks Director, Recreation Director, Facilities Maintenance, Planning and Development Director, Finance staff, as well as other staff who will also be presenting to you over the coming meetings. And we want you to ask questions because we want you to know everything about these projects so that you're comfortable when you make those recommendations to City Council in August. So thank you for participating and being part of this committee.
Thanks. For those of you who are new, just very quickly, again, my name is Jeff Barton. I'm with Gap Strategies. We're the firm that the city has hired to help facilitate this process. So the city had an open request for proposals. We responded and were selected by staff. We work all around the state, but I'm here today with my partner, Kara Buffington. She's a partner in the firm, and some of you met some of our other folks the last meeting, particularly the first two up there, Joey and Andres, are working very closely on this project, so you may see them from time to time. They'll be at a number of these meetings. We do a lot of this kind of work all around the state of Texas, so I see the Texas map kind of faded out on us there, but you can see we do a lot of work on bond elections, infrastructure, community development, long-range community planning. So we'll try and bring that context for you about what some other communities are doing and what's happening elsewhere as we work through this. We also have a couple of folks with us tonight. As advertised last meeting, we have the city's bond counsel and the city's financial advisor here. They're in the back, and they'll introduce themselves later. You'll be hearing from them about some of the details, what it means to really go out for a bond package. So let's talk just a little bit about logistics. Restrooms are out here if you need them. Don't hesitate. Just get up and go if you need to during the meeting, if that's right with you, Mr. Chair. And then we also have some information on your, at your seat. Each of you should have gotten a binder now that we've got the full committee. So we hope that's somewhat helpful. There's some key information in there. You'll find all the dates that are proposed right now for the future meetings. You'll find some other background information. It'll be a place, if you need it, to keep information we hand out. There's some scratch paper in there. So a place for you to take notes. Feel free to take that home with you if you like. You should also have a handout of tonight's slide deck. We may not give that every time, but I know that some of you asked for that, so
Right.
it's helpful to take notes on.
Please.
That deck is there. Also, if you prefer to look at things on the internet, this will be posted. The city wants a very public and transparent process, so every slide presentation that we give will be posted on the internet on the bond website by the next day. A little bit about what we're going to do tonight, really quickly. So we've had our introductions. I'm going to give you a little bit about the agenda, what's going on tonight. We'll go through a review of the last meeting just to refresh us all, and for those new members, give you a very quick overview of what we did at the last meeting. Then we're going to slow down and talk a little bit about the community survey. At the last meeting, we talked about putting a community survey out in the field. We've got some really interesting results to share with you tonight. So Kara will be walking you through how the survey was done and what the initial results are. Then we'll be hearing from our bond counsel and our financial advisor to talk about what's going on in the legislature, how bonds propositions can be structured, also what this might mean to a potential tax rate. Finally, on item 8, we're going to give you a sense of the overall project, what we call the project universe that's out there, all of the potential projects. Thank you, Karen. So we'll talk about the overall universe of projects, and then we'll just go briefly over the upcoming meetings, because after tonight, we'll start taking deep dives on those projects themselves. So we'll give you a preview of that, and that should take about 2 hours. Maybe less, depends on how many questions you all have. So what we want you to really get out of this, you know, this is mainly still just getting us all on the same level so that when we get to meeting number 3, we can begin to prioritize and make some decisions. But we do want to give you a little bit more exposure to financial implications so that you can begin thinking about this universe of projects and where your own personal pain points is, what the community seems to think about that, and start prioritizing your head just a little bit in advance, what you think are the key issues. Give you that snapshot of community sentiment and where your neighbors and colleagues are about this same thing, and that should help you just begin to shape your own thoughts so that we get into the next meeting number 3 and begin that. You've got this in your books, but a reminder that here we are today, and meeting number 3 comes up pretty quickly on the 28th of May. That will be one of our deep dives on issues. We'll be focusing on parks and facilities and some other things. Then the city, you'll have a big event. We've just noted there's a runoff election going for mayor. That will happen in between meeting 3 and 4. And in meeting 4, then we'll come back and talk about infrastructure, roads and sidewalks in particular, maybe some about some of the downtown projects. And in meeting 5, which is right now scheduled for June 25th, we'll be talking about downtown and some of those potential improvements for downtown and other facilities improvements. There's a lot going on with some of those projects, so that gives them a little time to mature. And we'll also, at that meeting number 5, talk about an open house. We'll be doing our first really serious prioritizing. We'll prioritize at each of these issue meetings, we'll prioritize within those issues. Which of these parks do you think are most important in the community? Which of these facilities? But in meeting number 5, we'll start to put that into context, parks compared to sidewalks. You know, how do we begin to structure a bond? It's not a final vote, it's nothing like that, but it is what we'll take then to the open house to show the broader community. Well, this is the initial work of the committee. This is the general direction they're headed, and we'll do that on a Saturday, let people come in and vote. It'll also be online for a virtual open house, so then we can come back for meeting number 6 and talk to you about, well, here's what you presented to the community as your preliminary findings, your direction. Here's what the community had to say about it. Now, what kind of fine-tuning do you want to do? All of that leads up to trying to get a report to the City Council by the end of July so that they have time to call the bond election. The bond election has to be called by mid-August, and of course, they've got a lot of work to do just to get the formal language worked out and the final details worked out before that. So, with that in mind, review. Feel free to raise your hand and slow me down as we go through the review. Some of you have seen this before, some of you hadn't. I'm not going to spend too long on any of these slides, but you have them before you, and don't hesitate to talk to us after the meeting. For those of you who are new, I want to renew something we said last meeting. If there's something you really have questions on or that people are asking about, also feel free to call me or Kara. Our cell numbers are in there, and you can call us nights, weekends. We really don't mind. If you've got questions, just holler. So we start off by talking about that it's been a while since Beaumont had its last bond package. In fact, a woman named Sally Ride was going up into space. The current vice president had not even been born. It just gives you a sense that it's been a while. It's been a minute. It was in March of 1983 that Beaumont had its last voter-approved bond package for $16 million for drainage. So bonds, as a reminder, for those of you who are new to this kind of process, they're really just an investment vehicle, right? The city will literally sell bonds to investors who will loan the city money up front. They'll break it into little pieces, probably. They will loan the city the money. The city will pay interest, but the city gets a good interest rate, better than you and I could get at the bank, because it's the city, and they're a reliable partner in a loan, and also these are tax-free. So there are a lot of options, advantages for investors, and it's a good deal for the city. It spreads out costs. It shares costs between the current generation here in Beaumont and future people who are going to be moving into Beaumont over the next 20 or 30 years, easing the impact. The same way most of us can't afford to go buy a home for cash on the barrelhead. This allows us to spread out the cost. And it gives citizens a chance to talk or have their say, at least, in the bond. We discussed, the current city budget and where it is. There's really not a way to pay for some of these very large improvements without going out and getting debt or really deeply sacrificing other programs or making a big tax increase unless you spread it out over the life of a bond. And there are several different kinds of bonds. GO bonds are the kind that we're talking about. There's also certificates of obligation, which are typically for shorter terms and a little bit smaller projects. They don't require voter approval. Here the city is talking about really a major effort, a major community discussion about the kinds of issues, or the kinds of projects that you may want to move forward on, and that will be a general obligation bond. Your charge really is to, oh, well, I should mention, we also discussed that the city has done a lot of work on this, so we're not starting from scratch. There is a community investment plan, there is a parks plan, there's a downtown plan underway. So there's been a lot of work that the city has already done to get pricing, to identify likely projects. Many of those plans have their own public involvement. And what we're now going to do is begin to really assess those plans, begin to prioritize them, listen to your fellows here in the community, and then report back to the city council with a recommendation. We're going to do that through a process that we call community-based consent, that we've developed over the course of our firm's life, and we want you to just keep this in mind, particularly for those of you who are new, but for those of you who were here last time, we talked about this at some length, and it's worth reiterating because it will become increasingly important. So we really want you to think about your own interests, but also what are the different interests in the community? What are the broader community interests? What's possible, what you want, but also what you can live with as a member of the community. And would just remind you, this is a chart we use a lot. Your positions are what often you show to the world. It's really what you want, but there are some deeper interests here at play. So when you listen to other people, keep in mind what their hopes and dreams, their interests, their fears may be. This is an iceberg, supposed to represent an iceberg. Those are often beneath the surface, right? A little bit deeper. So the analogy I used last time is a position may be that you want the Houston Astros to hit more home runs. You think they ought to hire more home run hitters. But really, your deeper interest is just that the Astros win more games. And you may not care, really, at the end of the day, whether they get better pitching or more home run hitters, so long as they win more games. So we're going to ask you to, keep that in mind. And, whoops, Kara, I'm going to let you figure out what I did while we continue talking. So just keep in mind that deeper discussion of interests versus positions as we move on to decision making. And when we get to decision making, we're going to use some technology, but we're also going to have a lot of discussion. There's not as much discussion from you tonight. You're welcome to ask questions tonight. There's going to be some time for some initial discussion and questions. But starting next meeting, we're going to have lots of discussion among ourselves. And we're going to build consensus wherever that's possible. We're going to ask you to collaborate, to listen to one another. We're going to use that technology, but then we'll fall back on this idea of community-based consent, where maybe everybody doesn't agree, doesn't love the idea, but you can live with it. And if there's places where people can't live with it, that's okay. It's a democracy. Then we'll vote, and we'll move on. I like to give this warning because it just always gets a little chaotic before it clarifies. We're a lot of people. You guys all have these big, strong community interests, or you wouldn't be here. So there's going to be a little chaos as we try and figure this out. But believe me, I'm confident we can come to some good report for the city in the end. Questions about the review? Great. Well, you'll be particularly interested in this next section. I'm going to turn it over to Kara, and she's going to walk you through the community survey results.
So we had a community survey that most of you took, many of you are aware of. That survey was primarily held on the project website, which if you haven't already, I encourage you to look at. The project website is beaumontbonds.com. We also had paper copies available at City Hall and all city facilities. That survey was live from April 10th to May 6th, and we had just under 3,000 participants, so 2,968 participants. The way we promoted that survey was through targeted advertising. We advertised on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Google. We also reached out to organizations. If you recall, I emailed all of you. Some of you responded to that email, gave us some good ideas of people we should reach out to. We also got a list of civic organizations from the city and some churches. We reached out to them. So some of it was kind of good old-fashioned reaching out to people who are active members of the community, but also in combination, with that targeted advertising. And then we made sure that it was available in Spanish, where we had someone translate it manually, and then it was also available in 132 other languages through Google Translate. We also made sure it was accessible, so if someone needed to use assistive technologies like screen reading software for someone who's visually impaired, it was accessible for them as well.
Kara,
Yes.
you may be going to get to this eventually, but is that proportion of response to our general population about what you're going to get there?
We're going to get there. First, I want to talk about the integrity of the data. We feel really confident in the data. We had some fraud detection software to catch people who sped through the survey, to try to catch potential bots. Then once those were flagged, we also manually sifted through all of the data as well. We had 16 surveys that were flagged as potentially bots or something else. Once we manually sifted through that, we kept those, we included those, so no surveys were taken out of that final tally. But still, we'd like to remind you that this isn't a science. This is a good way to judge community sentiment, but it is not a scientific poll or study. This is actually hard to see on this screen, but this is just an example of what it looked like for people who were taking it online. And here we get to some of the actual information. So where do you live? That blue up there, 29%, is Ward 1. Ward 2 is 36%. Ward 3, 17. Ward 4, 16.5. And then that small sliver is folks who don't live in Beaumont, but they workshop or go to school here. So one of the things which actually Mr. Boone pointed out to us is this really closely mirrors your turnout in your last election. Midway through the survey, so we would keep, while the survey was open, we would keep track of it. So at first, we were really heavily skewed towards wards 1 and 2. We had a lot of respondents from those wards, so we started doing additional targeting and advertising to the wards that were a little bit underrepresented. We don't fully represent your population, but we did get as close as we could. And then how do you describe yourself? 50% white Caucasian, 42% black African American, 4.9% Latino Hispanic, and then the rest of those categories, Asian, Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, are those small slivers up at the top, and then with an other up there. That other was mostly people who identified as mixed race, although we did have one participant who said that they were Chewbacca.
Okay, glance down.
Someone taking the entire thing very seriously.
I remember which one is.
Then we had, what is your age range? 25 to 35, 14.7%. 36 to 50, 31.3%. 51 to 65, 29.2%. Over 65s, 21.3%. A very small sliver under 18. And then also a very small sliver of 18 to 24-year-olds. Oh, hold on.
It almost stays with the voting trend, those numbers, yeah.
So this is where we get into the good stuff. We asked people the most important thing Beaumont can do in the next few years is. They had to select only one. And 45% said invest in basic infrastructure such as roads and sidewalks. Remember that number because we're going to get back to it. We asked this question a slightly different way a few questions later. Then we had 13.5% say they want to prioritize projects that generate long-term revenue for the city. So economic development, tourism, or business recruitment. Concentrate on basic city services, 9.7%. Keep taxes low, 8.7%. Plan ahead now to be prepared for growth and new challenges, 8%. Improve social services and the quality of life for residents, 6.1%. Upgrade or expand public buildings such as a fire station, an animal care facility, or police department headquarters, 4.4%. Build new parks, trails, and/or parks and rec facilities, 4.3%. And then a very small amount, take a wait-and-see approach. One thing I'd like to point out, so this mirrors a question we ask in a lot of other communities. But one thing I'd like to point out that we found in Beaumont is where we ask people, the answer that says concentrate on basic city services, once we dug into that 9.7% and looked and saw how they answered other questions, in a lot of communities, we think that means kind of, we don't want to raise any taxes, we don't want to do anything different, just concentrate on the basics of what we're doing. We think that in Beaumont, people might think of city services as a little more comprehensive, because in another question where they were allowed to submit a short answer in their own writing, they would talk about projects that they wanted done. So we want some infrastructure projects, drainage, things like that. So I'm not sure that I would read that as a let's wait and see. Some interesting things, 65-year-olds and up represent 72% of people who said keep taxes low, of that 8.7%.
That's right.
Oops. Oh, no.
So just to be clear, that doesn't mean that 70% of over 65 are against it. To clarify, just of those who are against it, a very high percentage are older.
That's correct. And actually, well, I had another piece of data here, but it got lost, so I'll have to look that up. I don't know what happened to that one slide. Are you currently inclined to support issuing bonds? So that dark green, yes. If I think the issues are important, even if it means a little more in taxes, that's almost 22%. Yes, if it can be done without raising taxes, is that 19%, 19.5%. 29.4% is maybe, but it's going to depend on the specific projects. 10.3% is not sure, need more info. Maybe not. 9.1%, maybe not, I'm concerned about debt and or raising taxes. And then that 9.8% up at the top is no. And then how much would you be willing to pay per month? I'll support them no matter what, is 18.6%. Up to $25 a month, 7.9. Up to $20 a month, 5.9. Up to $15 a month, 4.7. Up to $10 a month, 13.7. No more than $5 a month, 11.2. I won't support a bond package if it means additional taxes, 29%, and I won't support a bond package even if there is no tax increase, 9%. But another way to look at that is that 50.8% of respondents are willing to support $10 or more a month.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
In regards to the demographic that says I'll support the 18%, as well as the 9% that says I won't, regardless of what it is, do we know where they fall demographic-wise as far as ages, wards, things of that sort?
It's actually really, that's a very good question. It's something we looked at, and they're really split evenly among the community. So there wasn't any sort of break off. Sometimes you see, for instance, that last question earlier, where we talk about the over 65s, it would kind of lead you to believe that there are a lot of people over 60, that it's overrepresented among over 65s who say they won't support it no matter what. But really, when you dig into the data, it's pretty good cross-section.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay, with the other bonds that you did look into, how does these numbers fall?
That's a really good question. So in other communities, and Jeff, feel free also to jump in if you've got something. In other communities, we do see that there are a little bit, that people are willing to go a little bit higher. So we see, a lot of times we see a break in that $15 a month.
Yeah.
Now, that's in a lot of really high growth communities where, and also in communities that are really used to bonds. They're seeing them on their ballot regularly. They're in a county that's on a regular bond cycle, things like that. But one thing that's interesting about y'all is that you guys have a lot of people, if you go back to this question, you have a lot more people than we typically see who really just need a lot more information. So I think you can read, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I would just second that. You know, I think in some of the other communities we see a little bit higher number sometimes that is yes, absolutely, but also a higher number that is no, absolutely not. So you seem to have more people, as Kara said, that are open to some persuasion and or education, want to know more about what's the specific project, what is this whole bond thing about, and that does make sense. It's been a long time since you've done a bond. There's 70 to 80%. If you take the well, I need more information, then there's about 80% of people that are open to the idea, but a lot of them say it's going to depend on the specific projects and it's going to depend on the cost.
Gotcha.
And that's one reason why we think we're going to encourage y'all to ask a question like this again at the open house that we're going to have on July 12th, because I think that that'll be once we start talking to the community about really, right now we're saying, hey, of all the kind of projects the city could really do, where would you vote? What would you feel comfortable with? But once we get to that open house, we're going to be narrowing that pool of potential projects. We're going to be talking to them in some specificity about what things could look like. And then I think we'll get a better feel for where people are. On this question, we asked, it's really similar to that question you saw before. We said, where would you like to see city leaders put their priorities? We gave people, they could pick 3. So when you were allowed to pick 3, we have, I cannot read that very well, so I'm going to go over here. My apologies. We have 78.8% say improve and maintain roads, 56.8 improve drainage citywide, 26.4 increased city services, 25.6 repair or expand the sidewalk network, 23.9 economic development or economic or community development. This answer was a little bit longer. We specified downtown here. 22.5, keep taxes low. 19.2, facilities such as a police headquarters or an animal care facility. 18.9, a recreation project like a water park. 17.2, additional parks and trails. And 10.6, other. We found, yes.
Did you get a sense from individual responses on the increased city services, what they were looking for?
That's actually, thanks, that's a good segue. That's actually what I was talking about earlier. So when people, a lot of people who said that they wanted the city to focus on basic city services in that first question. Also, I think the number is in the low 60s. They also selected increased city services here. Several of them, about half of them, also were in that other category. People who selected other really talk about a lot of these issues that are right here. So, but they talked about them in more specificity. So people would say, this specific intersection needs to be fixed. This specific neighborhood needs some drainage to be addressed here, things like that.
I have a question.
Yes.
June, the question is to you, is any money's been blocked or whatever so far as drainage without this bond? I don't know where I heard that from. Or do we have money for?
Yes, we do. Yeah, the city has a 5-year community investment plan. If you want to go and view it, it's on the city's website. Go to the finance section, and you can see our current 5-year community investment plan. And we have various projects. We have a whole section for drainage within that plan, streets, water, sewer, facilities.
Do we have the monies, though, is what I'm saying?
Yeah, we do have money allocated. We allocated money in the current
okay.
budget. So,
Okay, that's
yeah.
good. That's real good.
And if I can kind of piggyback off of that, with that being said, has the city identified what the additional need may be for street drainage, or is that something that's still kind of be working out?
We're constantly working on our 5-year plan. Actually, we just wrapped up our internal review and update of the plan last week. Next week, on the 22nd, we're actually taking the 5-year community investment plan to City Council to present that plan to City Council. And then following next week, we'll be coming before this advisory committee here, and that's where parks and facilities will be discussing projects that are part of that 5-year community investment plan.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So when we looked at that, you saw in that earlier slide and in this one, improve and maintain roads comes up really, really high, higher than in a lot of communities we work in. And roads were the top issue in every single ward and across race and age demographics. So no matter who you are in the city, roads were one of your top issues. And this is just kind of interesting for us. Where do you get information about city news? 41% Facebook, 32.4 local television news. That's a lot higher than a lot of other communities we work in. The Examiner or another independent news source, 7.7. Beaumont Enterprise, 7.5. Radio X, Instagram, all of those little slivers up there, and then 7.5 said other. Those others were, some people went directly to the city website. A lot of people said they get it through their community organizations or their church or neighborhood listservs. Are there any questions I can answer about the survey? You also have an email there's a QR code and a link to where you can see all of those survey results. That's in your binders. And if you have any breakdowns that you'd like us to get some, we'll be diving more and more into the crosstabs over the coming weeks. But if you have something specific you'd like to ask, feel free to email me and we'll get that cross-section of data for you.
Before we move on, I just want to follow up on something Kara said. Really good data. 3,000 people, that's a strong response, first of all. So that's a good response. Think about how many people go out and vote in city elections. That's a lot of folks. When people do random sample surveys, they're often looking at 400 to 800 people. So 3,000 is a really strong survey. Having said that, this is not random sample, right? the gold standard of surveys is you don't let people opt in, you call every 100th name in the phone book or whatever it is, and so that way, you know, you're not getting any bias. Now, in the modern age, you all know it's so hard to get people on phones. There's a lot of debate in social service circles about which is now better, the traditional random sample or this type of opt-in. But typically, these still have slightly higher error rates than a random sample. There are lots of advantages to them. You're not trying to get people on the phone. You can ask more questions, keep people a little longer, get this. So we really like these.
I do have a question. She mentioned that in some of the wards, the response was lagging. How did you go about advertising that, or how did you pick that up?
Sure, that's a good question. So one of the things that we did is we relied on some of the input that y'all gave us about community organizations to reach out to, and also the city. So we called, introduced ourselves, asked them to send out the survey to members of their community. In fact, in a couple instances, we had paper copies of the survey delivered to specific churches. Then additionally, we did some micro-targeting. You can do some, I'm a little bit of a nerd about this, so if you'll bear with me, but you can do some really cool micro-targeting to zip codes and even get smaller down in zip codes online. Additionally, you can do things like, if I know you live in the city of Beaumont, and I know you've gone to these certain websites, so I think you might be interested in civic affairs, or I know you voted in a city election, I can target it so it'll pop up in your feed.
And why do you think the Facebook number was so large? Was the survey available on the city's Facebook page?
That's where they are.
And also, that's what we are seeing in every
Okay.
community.
Because
We also run a lot of ads on Facebook.
Okay,
So
great.
We ran ads on Facebook and in some other social media platforms urging people to respond, and those were often targeted ads. So just to elaborate, listen, Kara's really the expert on this, but we tracked about halfway the survey, we looked at which wards were underperforming, not getting enough, and honestly, we also looked at Latinos, blacks, and whites, and were we getting overrepresented in one area or another. So then we made an extra effort to reach out to any community where there wasn't enough response, and we ran ads targeted into certain communities and really brought those surveys numbers up to be more reflective of the overall community. The exception is we did not get, I believe Kara touched on it, but we did not meet Latino representation in the poll very well. So Latino response was a little bit lower. We did go back and look at Latino response and see if it differed. So are we really missing something? And while it's underrepresented, the Latino community seemed to answer it really very similarly to the other respondents in the poll. So it didn't look like that was skewing the poll too much, or the survey, I should call it.
But another reason, we were pretty underrepresented for a while. We were pretty underrepresented in the black community, and once we started reaching out specifically, some of those advertisements certainly worked, and frankly, they do represent the lion's share of it, but also also reaching out directly to some community organizations and churches, we found that not only did we get a better response rate, but it changed some of the answers too. So our data did shift based on getting that higher representation.
With that being said, in what way? I'm interested to see how it shifted.
You mentioned kind of views of the survey, response to taxes, for instance.
I'm going to let you because I think you have something specific and I'm not sure.
Well, there were a couple of things. You know, in some of the wards, I think if you looked at in general, in wards 1 and 2 and also in the white community, there was both more folks who said, no, I'm absolutely not interested, but also more folks who said, I'll pay whatever it takes. And then in the black community, there were more folks who were saying, I'm really interested, but I want to see what projects we're seeing. Are these projects that are going to affect my community and my neighborhood? And then a little bit more price sensitivity.
That makes sense.
It does.
That makes sense.
It does.
I want to see how it's going to affect me, because the trend could be in the black community, hey, they're not going to fix us. They're not going to do us. It's not for us. But that's a thought. That's what blacks think.
I think it gives you some pretty good insights, and I won't say that they were surprising, but they're useful. to think about.
Have y'all represented anybody that has similar demographics as Beaumont before with the?
Yes, absolutely. We've worked in communities that were as much as 80 or 90% Latino, and then we're working right now in Lancaster, Texas, which is a majority minority community, primarily Black in the Dallas area.
In fact, it's almost the exact same. It's actually almost the exact same demographics.
And population as well?
Not in population, but in racial makeup.
Slightly smaller population,
Lancaster, yeah,
Lancaster.
yeah, Dallas area.
And I only asked about Facebook because I think that's very important for the city, to have a very accessible, very updated Facebook page. And it's something that you work on, because people said it was going away because of Twitter and all this. It never went away. Facebook never went away.
Facebook is
So,
live and popping.
It's a different, right, especially for folks over 30, you know, over 25, yeah, yeah.
That's a good word.
Yeah, the wiser. I just want to close up on this. We've given this down to percentages like 7.5%, and that's the one place I just want to caution you, right? That's because that's what the data showed, but I wouldn't want to pretend that this data is that precise, right? This gives really strong indicators, but there are several things to keep in mind. One, just the data can be off several percentage points, you know, 5 to 10 percentage points. I think we feel good about it because it's reflective of the community and because we didn't have bots. When you see data like this that's way off, often there's a lot of bots or a lot of people participating who don't live in the community, and we didn't see any signs of that. We didn't see strange answers that didn't make sense. And also, you know, if it's not reflective, and this is pretty reflective of the community, so we feel good about it, but don't think of it as precise. Think of it as these really strong indicators.
Jeff, y'all worked in a lot of communities. Y'all done this in a lot of communities. Is there anything in the survey results that gave you pause or encouragement or?
The question was, is there anything that gives us pause or encouragement? And I would just reiterate something we mentioned earlier. You know, it seems that there is a lot of openness, maybe more than in most communities we've worked in, to considering bonds, but a little bit more questions, more questions and more people who are really undecided. So I think if you look at the support at $10 or more, or that $10 to $15 range, there is a majority, but it's pretty slim. So I think what that tells you is that, yes, there's a lot of openness to it, but it's going to depend, again, on the work of the committee, the work the city does, on having some logic behind the projects, or if not logic, at least good reason behind the projects, and then communicating that back out to the citizens.
One of the things, to piggyback on Jeff's answer, we see a lot of space where people can, where people are open to changing their mind or at least want more information. So this, I showed you that this 65 and up, that they represent 72% of that keep taxes low, but still only 27% of people who are over 65 are wholly unsupportive of a bond. And then the rest of those, by and large, are saying that they want more information. So I think there is this really, in addition to that changing how that data looks, you've also got this huge chunk of people who really just might be concerned about debt, might be concerned about raising taxes, but also just need a lot more information, and I think that's a good place to be for a community. Gives you an opportunity.
Can I ask you this? Do you use buzzwords like for your children or for your grandchildren?
For the future.
Buzzwords to try to make the hook, pull that in.
We do, yes, we do. And specifically when we're doing that targeting, that micro-targeting on Facebook, when we pull a group together and then we see what kind of interests they have, what ages they are. And so when we see that people are, you know, my age, so in their 30s and 40s and might have kids in school, we tend to talk a lot about for the future of the community,
Right.
for your
Makes sense.
kids, things like that.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, I'd just elaborate on this way. We do talk about that to try and get people engaged, but one of the things that we can't do, because we're being paid for with tax dollars, is advocate. So we are very, very careful not to say, hey, you need this bond for your children, or you should be against this bond for your children, because you as committee members may want to do that after your work here is done. If you like your recommendations to the city and you get into election time, then you're each free to follow your own conscience and promote the bond and say, hey, this is good for the kids, or not good for the kids,
Absolutely.
whatever you decide.
But to promote a city, to promote a community survey or for the town hall, we say that help determine the future, we want to hear your voice.
Can you also point to the success of the previous bond? Has anybody said, okay, we did the bond for the drainage and we finished 95% and this has affected, this has had a 47% positive effect on these areas, when we had or anything from water?
To your point, one of the things that we recommend to cities that we've already talked to Mr. Williams and other folks here about is if you decide to do a bond, whether it's with our firm or some other firm or just through city staff, you really need a very strong communication effort to talk about those issues, like what happened to the last bond, even though it's been a while. How will we be carrying this out? Further community meetings so that people can, if a bond were to pass, some meetings to show progress, so people don't see you come ask for money and then go away.
Right.
But even the open house, I think that would be something good to talk about. We did this and it was very effective. These are the positive things that have come out of it. So this is the kind of thing that we plan for whatever the next, bond issue.
A great point, and I'll add it to this. One of the things that, talking about what we see in the survey, there were a lot of questions about drainage and about some roads, about some things that the city already has budgeted.
Yes.
So when we get to that open house and when we begin talking to the community, that's going to have to provide context. Here are the bond programs, but that doesn't mean these are the only roads the city will be working on. Or maybe drainage is not included, but that doesn't mean you're not getting drainage. It's coming out of this other bucket. We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of this meeting tonight, because we're going to give you this sense of all of the potential projects, and then we're going to start giving you some that we think, in consultation with the city, maybe could be paid for elsewhere, so that you can begin to narrow down what would be appropriate for a bond package. With that in mind, other questions about the survey or comments? I think what we'll do is talk just a little bit. Keep in mind that you're going to get a sense of projects after this, but first we want to have the bond counsel and the financial advisor talk to you about, if the financial advisor is going to come up and talk to you about what it means, what $10 a month or $15 a month or $5 a month, what does that translate into dollars in a bond?
How much?
And Derek, the city's bond counsel, is going to talk a little bit about, how propositions can be put together and some things that go into the legislature. And as much as anything, we want you all to see that there's a really great professional team that the city has on board to address these details. Derek, good to see you.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm Derek Mitchell, as he said. I'm a partner with Holland & Knight in the Houston office. I've been bond counsel, I've served as bond counsel for the city of Beaumont for almost 20 years. And so every debt issuance that they've had since then, I've been a part of. So it is exciting, actually, to see y'all here today talking about bonds. We typically, within the city, issue certificates of obligation and water and sewer debt, which is more revenue generated. So it's nice to see, growth is coming, and that I think clearly there's a lot of interest in having this done. I'll be brief. So at the end of the day, what's important to note about my work, at least, is I'm more on the back end. At this point, there's laws in place that talk about how a city or an issuer may even talk about bond elections in general, right? So you can't advocate. So this committee at this point, or the city officials, can't necessarily advocate, but they can educate the public. That's very important to realize. Like, so you're charged right now with being educated and then going forth as committee members to educate. And that's the same thing for the city staff. The city can't use money for that, for advocation. Well, number 4, yeah, the bond language is tightly regulated. So at the end of the day, that's what you're here for. Once y'all cull down exactly the projects that you think should be part of a bond election, I'll come back and work with the city to help actually tighten up the language for the bond referendum. And at that point, we'll decide with the city whether or not you're going to have one huge bond referendum or if you break it up into several different projects. And that will be based on data that you receive from this group that tells you this is popular, this is not. You may want to hold off on that, or you'll decide as a committee whether or not, in the city, of course, will decide how to present it to the public from that perspective. I'm going to call up Dusty Traylor with RBC now. Well, do you have any questions for me on the legal side?
Derek, you might just mention to him, I think it's the next slide, there is some legislation that might affect this.
There is. So right now, in the our legislature is in session now, and bottom line, this legislature, no matter what your politics is, this legislature is not, well, they're making it more difficult to issue bonds and have bond elections for them to pass. So right now, bond election, if we had held a bond election today, you need 51%, or 50 plus 1, right, majority. In the legislature now, it would, if it passed, it would require 2/3 vote. So what that means is, if that passes, it'll become law September 1, which means if we're having a bond election in November, it would require a 2/3 vote. That's why these numbers matter, because we want to make sure that the numbers are high, right? If they're below, well, clearly if they're 40%, you probably wouldn't do it, but if it's close, it just says you have to advocate a little more. Others will advocate more, and you will educate more from that perspective. But there will be some things that come out of the legislature one way or the other that will affect this, and we'll talk about that after June 2nd, once session ends. Dusty Traylor, come on up. Dusty's with RBC Capital Markets, so we're kind of yin and yang. I'm the lawyer, he's the financial advisor, and so we help from that perspective. Some people call us Ebony and Ivory.
Yeah, you're right.
I'll let y'all decide which one has the better looks. Thank you, Derek. Again, Dusty Traylor with RBC Capital Markets. We have had the honor and privilege of representing the city of Beaumont for many years. I have personally worked as a financial advisor to the city of Beaumont for approximately 15 years and have assisted the city on all their bond issues during that time when the city has gone out for certificates of obligation, or as Derek said, waterworks and sewer system, revenue bonds, and that sort. Very good. Thank you. And so what the purpose of my presentation is to kind of show you guys what the city's estimated bond capacity is at various monthly impact to the average homeowner here in Beaumont. So to get there, we've got a number of slides to kind of walk us through that.
That's it, bottom line.
The slide that you see here basically just shows the historical tax base data and tax rate data here for the city of Beaumont over the course of the past 10 years. And the things that I'll point out from this slide, if you look at the tax rate, the tax base data, that's the graph on the bottom left of the slide. What that indicates is the city of Beaumont's tax base, whether it be single-family homes, multifamily, commercial, industrial, the aggregate value of the taxing base here at the city of Beaumont has grown by an average of about 4.71% annually over the course of the past 10 years. Additionally, if you look at the graph on the bottom right, that is where we look at the historical tax rate of the city of Beaumont. During this past 10 years. We saw the tax rate go up to about 71 cents, but it has now fallen to just under 66 cents. So here, over the course of the past 5 years, we've actually seen the city of Beaumont's ad valorem tax rate decrease. And that's both on the M&O side and the INS side, and I think it's maybe important to give a little distinction. When the city levies its tax rate, that tax rate is levied in two components. There is the maintenance and operations component of the tax rate, which is currently about 48.76 cents. The maintenance and operations component of the tax rate is the portion of the tax rate that is used to pay salaries, turn on lights, put fuel in various city vehicles, things like that, operate city buildings. The INS portion of the tax rate is the portion of the tax rate that is solely dedicated for the repayment of debt service on bonds. That's the only thing that the INS portion of the tax rate can be used for. That portion of the tax rate currently is 17.2 cents. On this slide, what we do is just provide a snapshot of the city's outstanding tax-secured debt obligations. These are all either in the form currently of certificates of obligation or general obligation refunding bonds. Currently in a principal amount of about $178.02 million. And you'll see, like I said, there's a smattering. Some of these are certificates of obligation. Some of these are general obligation refunding bonds. What those general obligation refunding bonds are bonds that were issued previously when the city has had an opportunity to refinance outstanding bonds to reduce the overall interest cost on bonds and reduce the overall cost of those bonds to taxpayers. And in my time working with the city of Beaumont, the city has been very aggressive about seeking opportunities to refinance outstanding debt over its life. Anytime the city's had an opportunity to refinance and lower that debt burden down, the city's taken advantage of doing that. That's why you see those obligations listed there. The graphs at the bottom of the page represent the annual debt service requirements on the city's currently outstanding debt obligations. So currently, the annual payments for those obligations that are paid for from an INS tax, the annual payment's a little bit over $18 million. That's fairly level, and we anticipate, based on the current structure, that those annual payments actually begin to drop in about 2034. You can see where the graph starts to step down. And so taking into consideration all of those factors, the city's outstanding debt, the current INS tax rate, the tax base of the city, as well as some growth in that tax base. Our analysis that we ran assumed that that tax base would grow over the course of the next few years by about a 2.5% clip. You'll notice, remember on the previous slide, it's actually grown at about a 4.7% clip. We used a little bit of conservatism in our numbers because we can't exactly predict the future. Additionally, in our model, we assumed an interest rate when we issue these bonds at a 5% interest rate. That's a little bit higher than current market rates right now. If we were to be in the market to issue obligations for the city of Beaumont, we would be somewhere in probably the 4.5% range. So we're not talking about issuing bonds today. There's all kinds of factors that go into interest rates on bonds. And so given that it would be some time before we actually issued those bonds, we did build in a little bit of conservatism in the interest rate as well. And so on the slide behind you is where we just provide a graphical depiction of the estimated bonding capacity of the city of Beaumont based on estimated monthly impacts to the average homeowner. And what you can see, if we're talking about no increase to the average homeowner, we would have bonding capacity of about $15.75 million. If we were to raise that up to about a $5 per month increase, that capacity goes up to about $86.7 million. Then going up another $5, we get to a bonding capacity of $157.65 million. That's at $10 per month. And then going to $15 per month, the bonding capacity grows to about $228.6 million. We could extrapolate this out even further. I just did, while we were sitting here, looked at 20 million. 20 million would get us to, $20 per month, sorry. $20 per month would get us to bonding capacity of probably just under $300 million. So it gives you a good idea of the capacity that the city has at various monthly impacts, again, to the average homeowner here in the city of Beaumont. That concludes the brunt of my presentation, but like Derek, I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Could you, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
My question is this. It's like years ago, for my home, higher interest rates, low interest rates. So on these bonds, do y'all shop that like that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Every time we go out for the city of Beaumont, the city hires, we work with the folks that the city hires as their underwriters. So we kind of lead that group. They hire a syndicate of underwriters to go out and sell these bonds. And they are shopping those, we're having them shop those bonds around to end investors all across the country to sell those bonds in their various maturities at the lowest rates that we can get in the market at that time. And so,
When you say underwriter, what do you mean by that?
sure. So whenever the city goes out and does a bond transaction, we as the financial advisor are charged with structuring the transaction. We're charged with helping the city put the financing package together, whether it be the securities offering, et cetera, also helping through the rating process and looking at how we can structure that payment process to meet the city's tax rate goals. The underwriters are other investment banks that are not charged with structuring the deal or anything like that. They are actually charged with going out and finding the investors and selling those bonds to the end investors. And so in the world of city finance, where cities are not just selling, you know, if you or I were to go out and take out a home loan for $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, we're going to go to one bank. We may shop it to a few other banks to get the lowest rate, but that one bank is going to buy our loan from us and they're going to hold it. In the case of city bonds, when the city is going out to issue bonds in the amount of $15, $20, $100 million, there ends up being a pool of dozens of investors that actually commit to buy the bonds. So there's usually not just one investor that's buying the bonds, it's dozens of investors. And oftentimes they're names that we all know. State Farm is a buyer of bonds. Travelers is a buyer of bonds. Pacific Life is a buyer of bonds. Wells Fargo, folks like that. But each of those investors are just buying little pieces of that bond, and we're helping to put it all together to make sure that there are enough buyers to equate to all of the bonds the city is offering at that time. And our job is also to hold the underwriters and investors' feet to the fire on the interest rate to make sure that they're not getting away with interest rates that are above the market norms for the day that we're in the market.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Derek, Dusty, thank you. Listen, I want to take just a second and slow us down here, because some of you, your heads have got to be spinning. Like that is a lot of numbers, that is a lot of jargon, and one thing I want to drive home to you is that you don't need to know all of that or really have a keen understanding of all of that to make the decisions we're going to make. That's not what this is about. What we've done for the last half hour is just want to give you a sense of what's in the background, right? So you know that that is going on, so that you know that there are some real experts who are going to take care of the detailed language. There are some really sharp minds that are taking care of the finance side to make sure the city gets the best interest rates. As we get farther along, there may be some things we can do with Dusty that we'll be working with your city staff and with Dusty to look at how do we phase out some of this spending, right? To take a road for an example, when you build a road, you don't need all the money at once, right? First, you need some money to get engineers to design it, then you've got to buy the right-of-way, then you start building it, and then maybe it's a year later before you finish building it. So you can spread out when you sell some of those bonds, and you don't start paying interest until you sell them. So there are ways that you can phase that to save a little money or get a few more projects in. There are some things that he can do to time it in the market to look for good, interest rates. Just want you to have a sense that all that's going on in the background and that we'll have a little bit of flexibility when we get to final numbers depending on how we phase those things and what's happening in the markets. Do tariffs drive interest rates up? Do they bring interest rates down? None of us know for sure yet. We're going to all find out together this summer. So I hope that's helpful, but I don't want it to be intimidating, right? You don't need to know bond law. Derek gets paid a lot of money to go do that, right? You don't need to be a financial expert. That's Dusty's issue. What we're going to talk about as we move forward are community values. And every one of you on this committee is an expert in community values. And that's what you're going to be here for, to think about, what really matters to this community, and are we getting the money?
That slide right there is the heart and soul of what we're talking about.
There you go, sir. That's right, Mr. Chair.
$5, $10, $15, a bang for the buck.
That's exactly right. That's the bottom line. That's exactly right.
And how do we know, as the taxpayers, and Mr. might know, that that's exactly what that's the only amount we're given? How is that portrayed to the taxpayers? I know it's not a single line item.
So he talked about that. It's kind of complex. There's your regular operations fund, which handles most of the stuff the city does, and then there's an INS. INS stands for interest and sinking fund. So it sinks the debt down, pays off the interest, and so state law is really clear. When you put something on a bond, it has to pay for the things that the bond language refers to. So the city's prohibited by law, essentially, from going out and taking that money and saying, what we really want to do is build a new suite for the city manager. Can't do it. Other questions before we move on? Let's talk a little bit about this idea. Now that you've got some background.
Just going on that color, as he indicated, every bond or obligation that the city issues must be issued in accordance with Texas state law. Yes. Every debt obligation that the city issues has, whether it is a voted bond, a certificate of obligation, a waterworks and sewer system bond, those bonds must, or those obligations must all be issued in accordance with Texas state law. The state of Texas has all kinds of laws that govern various types of issuance. And to Jeff's point, when we go out to issue bonds, let's say the city decides to do bonds for park improvements, we will be bound by the laws of the state of Texas, and the city will be bound by the laws of the state of Texas to spend that money only based upon what it's been voted for. So if the voters voted yes for a park bond, the money comes to the city's got to segregate that money and only use that money to pay for parks. And as part of that state of Texas legal process, every bond that we do, not only does it have to follow state law, it will be reviewed and approved by the Texas Attorney General's office before the money ever shows up at the city's office. So the city will go out to the market, issue the bond, city council will approve that issue, but before the transaction can actually close and funds be delivered to the city, the AG's office is going to review a huge transcript that talks about the security for the bonds, the projects, and they're going to go line by line to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed related to state law and how the money is going to be spent.
I may have missed it. I just want to make sure I'm clear. The process you're talking about with the AG's office, that happens before it's put on the ballot and voted on, or is that a process that happens once it's voted on and passed?
That process I just discussed happens once it's voted on and passes. Right. Now, as Derek mentioned in his comments, once this committee has decided on a package that they would like to put forward and the city council decides on exactly what type of bond and what amounts they would like to call, Derek is going to put together the ballot language, the proposition language, and things like that, and he's going to make sure that all of that language meets state law, and also to make sure that those items are published in local publications in accordance with state law, published at City Hall in accordance with state law, and that those I's are dotted and T's are crossed as well.
Dusty, yeah, in fact, we're going to come up with recommendations that are very clear language, right? Very, very clear language that can go to city council, that can go out to the public. And the city, I think, is determined to have websites and maybe Facebook information out there that talks about it in the same kind of clear language. But then we've all been there when you walk in the voting booth and there's this, you know, there's this much language, right? That's the legal stuff, right? You got to figure out, that's to meet certain state law. That's what Derek will be doing for us. And if we move forward, then it'll be this committee's job and the city's job to have some other information that really clarifies, okay, here's what Proposition A, for example, really means, right? It means this. It's a little confusing because we're talking about that there is bond debt out here, and we're saying that this is the first bond election since 1983, and I just want to remind you, that's because the city has, you know, a water and wastewater system that can issue debt that's paid back by revenue, right, directly, what people pay for those. And there are these certificates of obligation that we talked about that are more routinized expenses where the city has some debt. But this GO is still historic. And we heard Derek say that, you know, there are different ways that you can structure propositions. We've all seen that too. We've talked about a little bit that last time. Is this, you know, one big election, or is it really a series of elections all on the same ballot? Maybe one about parks, one about roads. And for a lot of different reasons, some of them legal and some of them just trying to give voters lots of choice, most cities these days really split those propositions up. And you can't take a really unpopular thing and put it in with, you know, you can't say, you know, the new $500,000 for foot massagers for, you know, administration and a police station, right? It has to be kind of like-minded issues. So we've begun to think about projects to give you all a little structure. You guys don't really have limits on what you can decide, but you know, we've got to begin to give it some structure, or you could be here for 2 years trying to figure out what to do. So the city has already done a lot of work, as we talked about. So think of it as we talked about a funnel, maybe a sifter is the right word, you know, as we're sifting through. The city has plans, they have a strategic plan, they have a community investment plan, they've got a parks plan underway. So they do a lot of work to go through and identify, all right, what are some key potential areas where we need help? There are even a few things that either aren't on that community investment plan or aren't on for the next 5 years that are looking way out there. There are some additional road projects that the city's paying for out of its routine budget, but may need to get moved up. So if you look at that total list, it's more than $1 billion of kind of what the city needs to do over the next 5, 10, 20 years. It's a big number. But what we're going to do is begin to sift that and funnel that down to the things that are the real priorities. Because we just saw, to get $1 billion, you know, it'd be $50 a month or something, $100 a month, and people aren't interested in that, understandably. So how do we begin to prioritize, right? So we've got this guidance from experts about maybe what money might be available. We're going to, over the course of these next 3 meetings, these deep dives, begin to prioritize these. Also, we've identified, and really your city has identified, some projects that can be paid for elsewhere. Some are built into the regular budget. Some of these drainage projects, some of that. Some of that is being paid out of these COs. Some of the water wastewater improvements are just being done out of your revenue bonds. So when you pay your water and wastewater fee, that's paying for some of those improvements. So we're going to be able to cut that down pretty fast, down to a more manageable number that you all can begin to prioritize. And then we're going to talk about what are like-minded things that might go on a proposition together. And we've structured the deep dives that way of some things that might go together. For example, on the 28th, we're going to be talking about parks and trails. Well, that would be like-minded things that could go on one proposition. And then we'll also be talking about facilities. Well, all facilities could go on as one proposition. Then we're going to come back at the next meeting after that and talk about infrastructure, roads and sidewalks. So that could, for example, be two separate propositions, but I think Derek can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he'd feel comfortable with roads and sidewalks being on a single proposition together as infrastructure, at least perhaps. And then finally, there's something, that last meeting the last two meetings we'll be talking about these downtown improvements that have been talked about in the local papers and TV some, are there improvements in the long run for some kind of river walk? Is there a convention center? Is there a downtown hotel? Some other facilities? There are a lot of other improvements there. There's some emergency facilities. Those might be one or two propositions there. So we'll try and structure these deep dives to some degree around things that you all could see as propositions. There they are, just kind of our really rough idea of how we could begin to structure this together. And again, these next three deep dives that we'll be having. So with that in mind, we're going to wrap up this evening by giving you a little sense of how we'll be doing this at the next meetings. We've got a spreadsheet that Kara's going to show you. And I think because of where it is, she would normally walk through this, but I think because of where the computer is, maybe I'll start and she'll come and kick me in the ankle when I talk badly about how this is going to work. But this gives you a sense of the spreadsheet that we've put together with a master list of projects. So you'll see over there on the left-hand side, and you don't need to read the exact numbers or the exact words. We're just trying to give you a sense of how this is going to work. Well, there you go. You've got it blown up. So there's the project, and we've got project IDs by them. You can see, if you just stop here so we can read one of them, P22. Create a master sign branding plan for the park system, or P24, P just meaning parks, right? Demolish existing pavilion structure and construct new pavilion at Roberts Park. So those are just some of the examples. We're going to have the park department here next week, so you'll have city staff to talk about some of the things that they see as a top priority. There's been a community parks plan developed with community input. So they'll be saying, hey, here are some of the things that rose to the top there. Now we begin to really prioritize those. Sure. Oh, yeah, sorry. So, yeah, we'll get to categories. We have estimated project costs there. You can see, we'll have a column for inflation, because some of these projects will take 2, 3, 5 years to get built. So we'll be building in, we have costs, but we're building in inflation. The city's already built in some contingency numbers, so they've got cost estimates for these, but they've been increased a little bit, knowing that prices may increase, and then inflation by year. And then we get to the Yeah, what Kara's saying is, you'll see what we'll do is put just an inflation factor across everything at the end, so they get some sense in the bottom of the columns, like add. Well, there's already some contingency built into some of these, and then we'll discuss together whether we want another contingency factor. But as we talk, Kara mentioned tiers earlier. If you can scroll up to the top there, Kara. So the way we're going to begin to divide this out at the next meetings is just, is this pretty much a yes for you? Yeah, this project, sure, should be in tier 1 just means it's pretty simple for you. Yes, we think it should be in there. Tier 2 is essentially the maybes that we want to keep discussing or you may want more information about. And tier 3 means not in this bond. Doesn't mean you don't think it's important. You may or may not. You may think it's not worthwhile. You may say, oh, great project, but it's not the priority right now. Or we may have already identified another way to fund it, or you may recommend another way to fund it. At any rate, it's not going in this bond. So that's how we'll begin to prioritize these, and then we'll prioritize within those groups later so that if the city council wants to make a cut, they can kind of know what your top priorities are. But our first mission is going to be to put these in these big buckets of yeah, maybe, no, as we go through each of these projects. It's surprising how much that helps. We'll get the stuff out of the way that we just don't need to spend a lot of time talking about. And that's one place that we may use some technology. There may be, between these meetings, there may be a little bit of homework for you. We may send out some things with a poll that you can fill out online that'll be a private poll just to us saying, yeah, I like this, I like that. So that if we come into a meeting and everybody's already agreed on a few things, we don't have to waste your time.
So you all mentioned earlier when we were talking about the community survey that you would see people give very granular responses about like this park or this intersection. If you had any commonalities in that survey feedback, will you guys also be pulling that out for us to align with one of these? You know, a lot of folks chimed in on this particular project.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we will. We'll be pulling out what we know from community surveys. So when we come to the deep dive, you'll see a little review about the surveys that relate to that deep dive. So you can make some decisions there, at least just have that current. And then we're working with your staff now they're already at work, I happen to know, preparing a short presentation. So for example, next meeting, we really envision 10 to 20 minutes of presentation from staff about parks. Here are the parks and trails that we're thinking about. 10 to 20 minutes on facilities. Here are the key facilities. Maybe an animal control shelter is under consideration, a fire station, that sort of thing. And then we're going to spend most of the rest of the time really talking among ourselves and you all talking among yourselves. Okay, how do we move these, which of these parks really kind of rise to the top? And where do we want more information? Yeah, I mentioned, as Kara's asking about total cost, I think we covered that maybe while you're there, but there's more than $1 billion in there, but I think we covered that. We'll be narrowing that down. And I think we can get that down to a few $100 million pretty quickly by taking some of these projects that can be paid for elsewhere, taking out some of the water, wastewater. Drainage is a big need, but it's being paid for out of some other funds. Some of these projects, I think staff is prepared to come to you. There are some things that we think are needed, but they could push out 5 or 10 years and maybe don't need to be on this bond. You all get to make your own decision, but the staff's going to come and say, yeah, we think some of these things could wait. Maybe one example might be a new city hall. There's been a lot of talk about a new city hall. You may decide you want it, but I think staff is saying, well, we'd love to have one, but we think we could do without it now that there might be other things more important.
Quick question. I know you mentioned the city will be able to kind of determine or suggest where some of these projects might be able to be taken care of from other sources. In their presentation on these deep dives and the upcoming meetings, will they speak to that to let us know this is a consideration, but we also have considered taking these funds from here?
Yes. In fact, what we will do, the chart that you just saw, we'll have some early recommendations of things that we think can just be moved over because they can be paid for elsewhere. So we don't want to be too presumptuous about that, but it's unfair to ask you to just look at hundreds of projects. So we want to really try and get this down to a place where you're community insights and your judgment is really needed to choose between projects, and we'll try and push those aside so you can see them, and if you want to say, no, 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 bring that one back over here for whatever reason you can, but we'll give you some structure there to start with.
Thank you.
We've covered a good bit of this, but you'll see these deep dives next time. You'll see these short presentations. The city's going to work to keep these pretty concise. There's a lot of information there, but we're going to try and winnow it down to those key issues and kind of big philosophy. Here's what the park plan means. Here's how we came up with it. And here are kind of the key areas where we think might be appropriate for Parks Bond. And then we're going to have identified, okay, places where there might be other funding. In parks, that might be grants that are available, for example. In some of the others, in streets, it may be that routine maintenance and operation of streets, something people talked about a lot that they want, well, that can be handled out of another bucket of money. But there may be a few major expansions or new streets that you want to think about putting onto a bond. Again, here are the dates for you, just so you get a sense of what's coming up. There's no real specific homework with this, but just for you to have in mind, maybe as you're driving around the city, right, talking to your friends, like, here are the issues, the way the deep dives will be structured.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Listen, there were several things in the news, I want to say in the last 2 to 3 months, maybe 6 months, with issues with some of our parks and getting some things done. Is that, am I thinking correctly? There were some issues about getting some projects done in some of our parks. Did that happen, or? And the only thing, the reason I ask that question is because I want to be, if someone comes up and asks, I want to be able to have the information to address that, how that was resolved, how it will never happen again, or plans put in place to, you know, prevent things like that. Because I know I've seen it on the news a couple of times about some issues in completing some projects in parks.
Yes, so I know going back 2 or 3 years ago, the city council budgeted $1.6 million to do basically there are a lot of parks with basically equipment that was in need of repair or replacement. And so city council allocated $1.6 million to do a lot of improvements in a lot of parks. Having said that, one of the things you'll see if you look at the proposed parks, the new parks plan, is that there's still a lot of work to be done. And so that's part of the equation as we look at the new parks plan. So there's still more to be done.
Yeah, and to add on to that, we have our parks director here, but we have been working on putting together from the Parks Master Plan, and not just from the Parks Master Plan, but addressing especially equipment replacement and playground equipment replacement within parks. I mean, that's been something key. I don't know if that's exactly what you're referring to, but those, and you will see that when we meet on the 28th. That's why we have the Parks and Trails item at the very beginning, because we will have just approved a Parks Master Plan. That's actually going to our City Council for approval next Tuesday. And in that plan, it does have a lot of park improvement, which we will present to you to include on the bond referendum.
And Jude, just to clarify, you've got a parks plan of things that your staff, some of whom are here, and the community have worked out and said, these are our park priorities. Some of those you have ways to pay for, and other things, even though they're a priority, you don't have any way to pay for it unless it goes into the bond right now, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. In the 5-year community investment plan that is also going to City Council next week, we'll be presenting that to them next Thursday. They will get the full slate of all of the projects that we have in the Parks Department or in the parks area, based on the community, based on the parks master plan that will be presented to City Council for approval next week, as well as projects that's been in our community investment plan for the last 2 years.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, did you have a question?
No, sir, not at all.
Well, that begins to wrap us up. I think we've beat our 2-hour mark just slightly. We'll try and overpromise and underpromise and overdeliver. I know some of the later meetings are going to get tough, but we've got some time for questions.
Once a project is budgeted and the project comes perhaps under budget, what's the reallocation process?
I'll let maybe Derek or Dusty want to jump in, but the question is, if a project is budgeted and it comes in under budget, so I can speak to that, and they'll correct me if I'm wrong. But if you, for example, say we want to do Road A, and you create the bond language so it says Proposition B, just to pick a number. Proposition B to accomplish Road A, and if you add to that language and any other roads, then the city, as long as it finishes Road A, it's got to do Road A first, because that's what you promised, that's what you spoke to specifically, but then you can take money that comes in under budget and spend it on other projects. Would you want to elaborate on that, Dusty? Thank you. Other like projects. You can't take that money and then go spend it on parks. But if you've said in the bond language, Road A and other roads, then if something comes in under budget, you can apply it to other road projects in the city that need work on. Other questions about tonight or the process?
I do. I'm sorry.
Sure. No, glad. Please.
One thing I thought that may be helpful in kind of what we're doing as well as for the community, do we have the ability to request information, data from similarly situated cities in consideration of the amount of bonds they've put out, the $5 a month, this is what they did, and with this money, they use it for these things. It was a good idea to do this, maybe not so much, so that we can have guidance.
Sure. We, in fact, were going to have a few slides, and it was getting dense, but maybe see if this speaks to what you're asking about. We could look back, I think, and give you a few example cities of where their community survey came in, which might be helpful to you. Like, here are a few cities where the community survey said 60% of people wanted to see a road project, and to let you know how that translated into the actual vote so you could compare, and then also maybe some of the projects that they did. It just varies a lot from city to city how they do those, how big the road projects are or what they're doing. But we'll work on coming up with some of that maybe in each category. It's good. That's a good suggestion. We'll think about ways to try and incorporate that, and really for all of you at each meeting, if there's some additional information after parks, don't hesitate to reach out. And I want to remind you, we're gonna do parks, for example, next meeting, and we're gonna come up with a priority at the end of that, at least by buckets, right? Here's the buckets that are yes for sure. Here's some maybe buckets. That's not your last bite at the apple. I just want to reiterate that. When we get to meeting number 5, before we go to the open house, we'll be revisiting all of those. Because you may say, for example, oh, I want these 6 parks, but then, I don't know, once you hear about roads, you might decide, well, those roads are really more important than these parks. So we'll give you another bite at how you want to shift and prioritize those.
Thank you.
June, was there anything else that you wanted to add, or Chris?
Nothing in particular. I know this was quite a lot of information today, and as Jeff mentioned, we're going to break it down. I mean, we're starting at a very high level. at the top of that cone that Jeff showed you. And we as staff, we will help the committee narrow down the projects. When we have our next 3 deep dive meetings, we won't bring you everything because we have hundreds of projects in our community investment plan, but we will bring you specific projects that are in our community investment plan to help you have a more narrow focus on the projects, because we don't have much time, have about 3 months before we have to take this to City Council for a recommendation, and we'll be very considerate of your time.
And we'll really be hustling to upgrade. You know, there's a lot going on right now because of the Parks Plan, the Community Investment Plan. We'll be updating all of that, pulling all of that into the spreadsheet so you can see, oh, here's some recommendations.
Could you go over again the part about advocate and educate?
Sure, absolutely.
About the fact that there's something that I may like, but I can't advocate for it? How does that work?
Thank you. Yes, let me explain.
Please.
Within this committee, feel free to advocate. In fact, your job is to advocate for things that you think are important here. So that is absolutely permitted for you to say, I think this needs to happen. What we can't do is spend tax dollars to advocate for the bond and say this needs to pass. In here, you're not being paid by the city, and you're a private individual. You're absolutely allowed, and even I think the city wants you to speak up and say, hey, I like this project. I think it's important to the community as a whole. I think it's important to my neighborhood, whatever your perspective is. What's not allowed is for June to go to the Lions Club and say, we have to have this city bond. I want all of you to go out there and vote for it. The committee's working on it now. It'll be on the ballot. Remember to go vote for it in November. That's against the law. He can go to the Lions Club and say, hey, you've invited me to here to speak, and we've got this bond coming up, and I'd like you to know what's in it. And here's why committee members said this was important. And now you guys go out and make your own decision. So because we're being paid for by tax dollars, we can't give an interview to the TV station and say, the committee's done great work, you should all go vote for the bonds. We can say the committee's done great work, and they came up with some really interesting ideas about what they wanted to put before the community, but we cannot advocate for passage. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
But that really relates to the election. In here, just to drive home the point one last time, we want you to speak, you know, both what's in your head and your heart in this meeting about what you think needs to happen.
Do we have any more copies of the slide deck?
Yeah.
Sure do.
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that.
Tell them the project website.
Yeah, and the project website, Karen?
Oh, sorry, BeaumontBonds.com.
Thank you.
Did everybody hear that? BeaumontBonds.com.
Our binder. Yeah.
That's also in your binder. You've got a page that gives the address for the project website, gives, I think, everybody's name, gives our numbers. All right. If you give those to us, we'll bring them back for you. If you'll leave your oh, I lied.
Yeah, leave it.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I think that's all we have.
I think that's all we have. We'd like to thank the city of Beaumont, Jeff, you and Kara for doing an excellent job, and most importantly, these members that leave your job or whatever you're doing to be here. It means a lot. Thank you so very much. What they say, David, until we meet again? Until we meet again, right?
We meet again.
All right, 28th. Meeting's adjourned.